Hello, Toastmasters. Mr. Toastmaster, welcome guests. Welcome to the wonders of Egypt, the trip of a lifetime. I would ask that you will, since you will certainly have some questions during the presentation, I would ask that you save those questions to the end, and I'd be happy to address them at that time. The first place we went was the country of Jordan, where the feature most in the limelight is an incredible complex of canyons and valleys called Petra. Normally, this would take 3 to 4 days to explore. What we did was to take the first 4 kilometers, which runs from the opening gateway here, winding through a narrow canyon until you get to the Treasury. Further on, as you come in, it opens up into a valley. You can see the amphitheater. And then finally, at the top of the cliffs here are the royal tombs. This is the Treasury. You may, in fact, recognize this as having...
Wait, you're going to do what now?
Well, we're going to look at the Treasury here. This is an amazing feature that was featured in the movie Indiana Jones. And
oh, did I already log on already? Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to just jump in. Okay. Hi.
That's fine. I appreciate your comments. If you have any questions, I will address them at the end of the speech. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I was really curious about this.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the most amazing things about Petra is that rather than climbing up and dangling from the cliff or trying to build scaffolds to carve this out, they put an enormous pile of rock and sand in front of the cliff and then started carving at the top, and then carved it from the top down, gradually removing the pile of detritus from in front to where they could finally dig out the chambers that are within. The chambers are unfortunately closed off to the public, but they do exist. As we progress a little bit further down the canyon, we come to the amphitheater, which was carved entirely from stone. It is the largest stone carved amphitheater in the entire world. And further on down the canyon, we come to the royal tombs, which were up here on a cliff, 192 steps to climb to get up there.
You know, Rich, this reminds me of when I was in Israel. There were places like that, and you had to climb up to the top of a mountain and see what was on the other side. I was really intrigued by that.
I'm sure it was a similar experience. Thank you for contributing, Carl.
Anytime, Rich.
After we left Jordan, we flew to Cairo, and this was the map of our travels in Cairo. We spent several days around Cairo, exploring the valleys of the kings and queens, the Giza Plaza, the Saqqara. Then we flew to Luxor, where we got on a boat. We cruised down the Nile for 3 days till we got to Aswan. Then we flew down to Abu Simbel, back to Aswan, back to Cairo, and then home. The night we arrived in Cairo, we were treated to an astounding, absolutely amazing light show. We were up on the Giza Plaza, Giza Plateau. We had a light show that they had various different colors of lights on the Sphinx and the pyramids, speakers all over the place, and a sepulchral voice that was ostensibly the voice of the Sphinx narrating the entire history of the primary 3 Egyptian dynasties. Pardon. I would ask that people refrain from chatting because it interferes with my ability to advance the slides every time that pop-up comes. Thank you. Bit of trick photography here. One of the incessant things that we ran into the entire journey were the hawkers, the vendors that would come up waving their wares, either a sculpture or a scarf or some other piece of clothing. $1, $1 US. And so it was a catchphrase that among our group we kind of adopted whenever there was a strange thing going on or something that was interfering with what we were doing. We were just saying $1 to each other. We went to the Cairo Museum. There were hundreds and hundreds of artifacts. One of the things that most intrigued me were the Canopic Jars. When a body is mummified, they open it up, they remove the inner organs and place them into the Canopic Jars, which are then placed in a ceremonial box of either wood or stone and buried with the mummy in its multiple nested sarcophagi. They actually nested typically the pharaohs in 3 sarcophagi that were nested like Russian nesting dolls.
I thought I read where they were used for food.
No, they were not used for food. Food was buried with the accoutrements that accompanied the pharaoh, but the Canopic Jars were, the contents were sacred because when the individual arrived at the next world, he would need his organs.
Yeah, and I think Van Daniken refuted that. He was convinced it was food related, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Art. Van Daniken had some very interesting ideas. I'm not sure how much in the mainstream they are. The feature artifact, of course, of the museum is the death mask of King Tut. They're currently in the process of moving all of the artifacts from the Egyptian Museum to a new museum called the Grand Museum, which is much closer to the pyramids. But they left the death mask and some of the other Tut-related artifacts in the old museum, and we were able to see them.
That looks like my ex-girlfriend.
You lucky guy. The next day we went to the Giza Plaza and we visited at Saqqara, the stepped pyramid of Djoser. Now you'll notice that the architecture is different. It's stepped, much like the pyramids in South and Central America. But this is the oldest pyramid known in Egypt. And oddly enough, Djoser also built a completely separate temple to hold his canopic jars across the plaza from where the pyramid is. From there, we went to the Plateau of Giza. And of course, these are the main pyramids. The big one is the Pyramid of Khufu, Greek name Cheops. This smaller one is the Pyramid of Khafre, son of Khufu. Greek is Khephren. And the one that's hidden behind the smaller one is the Pyramid of Mencore, who is the son of Khafre. So it's grandfather, father, and son for the 3 pyramids. I was fortunate enough to be able to go inside the pyramid. You go down through a short tunnel and then up through another tunnel where you have to crouch over for the first half. And then you get to the main gallery, Grand Gallery, which is 28 feet tall and 155 feet wide. When you arrive at the top, you enter the King's Chamber. Here is a picture looking up in the Grand Gallery. You can see how tall it is. And here's me standing next to the sarcophagus, the stone sarcophagus in the King's Chamber. One of the interesting things I did when I was up there was I pulled out my phone and played Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon album.
That's a pretty pithy helmet.
A lot of the spectators very much appreciated that. I got a lot of thumbs up. After that, of course, you can't go to the Plateau of Giza without seeing the Sphinx. The interesting story about how the Sphinx lost his nose is that Napoleon's marksmen were practicing their target. They're using the nose for target practice. At that time, only the head of the Sphinx protruded above the sand. The rest of it had not yet been unearthed. And before we left, the Sphinx whispered secrets into my ear, which I must never reveal. This is a segment from inside the actual tomb of King Tut in the Valley of the Kings. You can see the typical, and these are original colors. It's been cleaned but not restored with fresh paint. Interestingly, every one of these little figures always has a cartouche. The cartouche is that oval shaped thing with hieroglyphics in it that tell you the name of the figure. Here, for instance, is King Tut, and this is Anubis. This here is Isis. The outside of the tomb is very interesting. This large tomb, this is the entry to the tomb of Ramses IV. And Ramses IV, the detritus was over here. The tomb that entered King Tut is right over here. And the story is that a water boy of Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter was digging in the sand so that he could set a jar of water and support the jar so it didn't fall over. And while digging, he uncovered the capstone for the tomb of King Tut. This is the tomb of Hatshepsut, the first female pharaoh of Egypt. She's actually buried in the Valley of the Kings since she was a pharaoh. And that little beard that you often see the Egyptian pharaohs wearing, it's actually a false beard. And because Hatshepsut was a pharaoh, she also wore the beard appliance. From there, we went to the Valley of the Queens. The tomb of Nefertari is the standout there. Nefertari was the wife of Ramses II. This is all original paint. It's been cleaned but not restored. The paintings are just exquisite. From Cairo, we flew down to the Luxor, spent the next 3 days on the boat, going to various temples. Finally, at the end of, we got out at Luxor, or no, we got up at Aswan, and then we flew to Abu Simbel. This is
See the damage there?
I'm sorry, say again?
Yeah. It's pretty bad down there, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And the tomb of Abu.
Oh, sorry, I must have come unmuted again. I am so sorry to mess up your speech. Okay, I'm sorry.
All right, please, let's continue. The tomb of Abu Simbel was relocated in the 60s, between 64 and 68, at an international effort at a cost of $40 million. In current money, that's over $100 million. There were two tombs, actually. This is the tomb of Ramses II and the tomb of Hathor, who was incarnate as his wife Nefertari. You can see here in a model, the glass represents the surface of Lake Nasser that was formed by the construction of the High Aswan Dam. Down here under the water is the original location of Aswan, of the tomb of Ramses II, and up here is the new location. It's some 200 feet that it was relocated. 33,000 tons of rock in 807 blocks for the large temple, and 235 blocks for the small temple that was relocated here. From there, we went to the island of Philae, which is a Greek name. And there was a period of time when the Greeks conquered ostensibly Egypt, but the Egyptians like to say that Egypt conquered the Greeks because the Greeks basically went native. They adopted a lot of Egyptian styles and format. But I want to show you one of the startling differences between the Greek temples and the older Egyptian. You can see the older Egyptian, the paintings are, they're flat, they're very stylish. The hands and feet were stylized, only the thumb was separate and the four fingers were together. With the Greek style, you can see features like the belly button and the leg muscles and the gluteus maximus. It was a tribute to the Greek sense of realism. Both of these are depictions of Isis, the wife of Osiris. You can tell by this headdress and by the cartouche that has her name next to it. The last thing we did was a party, the Galabea party. In certain cultures, it's also called the Jalaba, which, as you can see, I got my own, and we had a lot of fun dressing up. And from there, we flew back to Cairo and then back home. And so it was a fascinating display. Does anybody have any questions that I can address? Mr. Toastmaster.